I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:09 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Have the coordinator call the roll.
Working. Oh, there it goes. Thank you. Ms. Jackson? Present. Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch? Here. Dr. Harner?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Mrs. Powers?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Work. All right. We do not have any media students here tonight helping us with a televised program for the board meeting, so we'll now move on to recognition.
Thank you and good evening. 3 Auburn High School students were selected to participate in the 2015 Illinois Music Education Association All-State Music Festival. These students were selected to perform at the state level after a successful audition. Junior Douglas Chan performed as 6th chair clarinet in the All-State Band. Senior Emma Lundquist made her 2nd trip to All-State. She performed as 2nd chair flute in the All-State Band. And Senior Allison Pittman performed as alto number 2 in the All-State Choir. Congratulations to these students, the staff who teach them and coach them, and to their families for their success. Please join me in congratulating these students and their accomplishments. I do know that Allison Pittman is here. Allison, come on up. And Lynn Olson, who is the orchestra and band director for Auburn High School, is also here to accept these acknowledgments. Come on up, Lynn. Thank you. Allison Pittman. Four teachers from RPS 205 were among the 20 outstanding finalists for the 2015 Golden Apple Award, representing public and non-public school districts in Boone and Winnebago counties. Our finalists are Barb Chidley from Auburn, Amelie Lapereau from Jefferson, Amy Orvis from Marshall, and Melissa Wolf from Guilford. On March 12th, representatives from the Golden Apple Foundation surprised Mrs. Orvis in her classroom. The Rockford Register-Star said she won the coveted award because she is always up for a challenge. She helped the district expand its Maria Montessori school to include middle school. She embraces diversity and highlights the strengths of each of her students. On March 16th, Roosevelt Community Education Center principal, Dr. Heidi Huey, was surprised at Roosevelt with the 2015 Puree Family Outstanding Principal Award, also given by the Golden Apple Foundation. Dr. Huey is in her 3rd year at Roosevelt. She told the Register-Star that the award wasn't about her, it's about the kids. The kids who come to school here, they choose to come here. They know it's not also interviewed a student about Dr. Huey. Senior Jermaine Robinson said, "She's an excellent mentor and friend. It's deeper than a job to her. She's pretty awesome." All the Golden Apple winners and nominees will be recognized May 1st at the Golden Apple Foundation's Excellence in Education banquet. I do know Barb Chidley is here, and Amelia LaPerot is here, and Dr. Hui is also here. Let's please give them a warm round of applause and congratulations. Thank you, sir. That is all.
Thank you, Mr. Dotson. Okay, we'll move on to the petitions and communications portion of our meeting when we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. During this petitions and communication portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you will be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions in order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in an efficient and effective manner. We are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. We have 6 speakers tonight, and we have a clock on the wall to help you with your 2 minutes. I'll remind you that it's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. 2 names will be called, the one whose turn it is to speak and the person who is next, and I would ask that that second person come to the front so that they're ready to go. And we thank you for your interest and your cooperation in our guidelines. So our first speaker tonight is Brandy Brown, to be followed by Jenia Tenen. And I'll need you to hit that. There you go. Thank you.
Educators serve a purpose in the lives of children to connect them to educational success within their community and their career paths. African American children. The following data that I'm about to present demonstrates the continuation of social and educational inequality educators are serving African American learners within this district. The data shows that Rockford's African American students' graduation rates, standardized testing, and classroom school performances are low when compared to their white peers, which is the result of the racism experienced within the schools. Historically and presently, African American students experience racism. First, the racism these children experience creates the worst psychological damage of miseducation. This illustrates schools as crime scenes when psychological damage of miseducation takes place. Miseducation happens when the decisions making for African American learners does not include a racially and culturally comprehensive curriculum, racially and culturally conscious and competent educators, pedagogy, and framework to address the many complex social issues that confront African Americans in society, and as well as talent and recruitment path towards individual self-hatred or racial identity. Enough is enough. It is time for the status quo education to end with learning while black, healing racism, miseducation of the black child workshops to be conducted within our district.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you. Jenia Tenen, to be followed by Elsie Wilson.
Good evening, everyone. I'm actually a parent from Westview. I'm only here because there was a situation at the school that I was told that I wanted to have a conversation with another parent, and I was told that you cannot speak. The parents cannot communicate. I found out later, which the incident happened 2 weeks ago, that that's not true. And so I haven't heard anything back. I'm in the schools Monday through Friday checking on my child, and I haven't heard anything back from the board, so I was concerned. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Elsie Wilson, to be followed by Prophet Youssef.
I have a series of questions. Is District 205 pushing kids out? Is District 205 closing the school discipline for elementary school suspensions? Are there disparities in suspensions? Pretty much is aware that there are high rates of suspensions related to young males of color than to other population in the school settings. Do our schools use punishment to drive students out of the classroom? Does District 205 actually encourage dropout in response to pressures from task-based accountability? Example, No Child Left Behind Act, which creates incentives to push out low-performing students to boost overall test scores. One thing is clear to many education professionals, and that is suspensions does not work to solve the problem. But the fact that suspension is still so rampant in the United States school suggests some attitudes of teachers and administrators toward pushing disruptive students out of the classroom has not changed. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What I want to speak about tonight, children, you are not stupid. Have you ever thought of yourself as being less intelligent than others? Did other kids at school call you dumb? If so, how did this make you feel about your ability to learn and be considered a good student? I know someone who was held back in first grade and lived with the stigma of being academically slow for the rest of his school career. Average artistic skills were one of the most creative persons I know. Perhaps you know someone like this, or maybe this is similar to your story. Many people, simply because they do not excel in certain subjects at school, are labeled as dumb or slow and are considered inferior to other students. But are they really dumb? Are they really inferior? Or is it just that most traditional school systems focus on a particular approach to reading, writing, and arithmetic? What about those students whose natural abilities do not lend themselves to success in those areas? Who and what really is stupid? But there are 8 kinds of smart that people don't talk about, but I'm going to talk about it tonight. 1, word smart. 2, logic smart. 3, picture smart. 4, music smart. 5, body smart. 6, nature smart. 7, people smart. 8, self smart. By broadening our understanding of what it means to be smart, it becomes easier to understand. In what ways are you smart? Find out tonight. And use your smartness to become successful in life. And the man I was just talking about was the first African American to get the Congressional Medal of Honor in Vietnam. His name was James Anderson Jr. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Allison Wing, to be followed by Henry.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On our hands, we have had some rather interesting overseas travel expenses. So 3 administrators are going to be sent all the way to Madrid, Spain on the mission of employee recruitment. A total of 11,100 that you will approve a trip all the way to Europe in order to recruit a person or some people for more than $10,000, while you also ignored calls for a national search for a superintendent, which is arguably the most important role for the school district. And so is it really so necessary in order to go all the way to Europe to find a Spanish-speaking person that can work in RPS 205? Given the incredible diversity in the United States and the substantial Spanish-speaking population here, is it truly impossible to find at least one qualified employee in Illinois? Now, I would be completely fine with all of these expenses if it were under completely different circumstances. If we are in a time of surplus with absolutely no budget cuts, then fine, go ahead and blow over $10,000. If more than a dozen schools were not short on paper, then go ahead and send some people to Europe. And if supplies are really $2.5 million higher, then doesn't that just call for a tiny bit more careful spending? And right now, I could just get in my car, drive down to East State Street, and walk into Walmart, and with $11,147 in my hand, I could buy 2,067,500 sheets of paper. Imagine how much more students can gain if you spend money correctly. Just think of the possibilities that could come true. Thank you.
According to the Illinois State Board of Education, the average ACT score for the class of 2014 is an 18. The state average is 20, the national is 21. In order to get into any college, you have to at least have a 21. Then there's news of budget cuts. You already know what you're doing. I don't have to tell you what it is you are doing. 90% of the city workers in the city are white. And we find out that any child that is labeled with a mental disorder does not qualify for city jobs. So on top of children not graduating, in particular black children not graduating, those who do graduate, because only 47% of those in special ed who are in special ed graduate, those who do make it then find themselves that they can't even get a job with the city they live in once they get out of school. This is not an accident, though. We understand that this is on purpose, but I don't blame the school board for you doing what it is that you are doing, but I wanted to speak also to the community, because it seems that even though we come speak to you, we are not the ones you want to speak with. So there are those in our community who feel that they can go behind the backs of those who are speaking to cut deals. We call those sellouts. We call those times. We call those who you want to speak with because it's comfortable for you. They make you feel comfortable because they don't want anything from you but to sit at the table with you, but we don't want to sit at the table with you. And you don't have enough jobs for your own. You don't have enough students of your own graduating. If white children can't graduate, the superintendent said at a meeting at Guilford, and I got it from a teacher, that only 40% of the students who come to the schools here are ready for school in kindergarten. And the percentage is the same when they graduate. In fact, it's lower, which means you all have failed at your job, which means there must be a change. But the change is not coming from you all. The change is coming from us. Guarantee it.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, Henry. Can I have you turn that mic off for me? Thank you. Board members, are there any board member comments at this time? Mr. Connor.
Congratulations to the Auburn Scholastic Bowl team for winning state.
Absolutely. Any other board member comments? If not, we'll move on to the consent items. The consent items including meeting minutes from March 10th, 2015, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, contracts under $10,000 and travel. The following bid recommendations, Spring Creek Elementary School boiler and window replacement projects, the E-rate 2015 infrastructure, and the keyless card access installation. The following recurring contracts, the Ombudsman Program for Alternative Education, investment report for February 2015, the financial results year-to-date through February 2015, the interest transfer for February 2015, and the Freedom of Information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve the above consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Rollins? Or
I'll pull 9B and 10B.
10B, okay. Ms. Jackson?
So 7, E,
Seven.
F, 8, 9A,
All of 8?
yes,
Okay. And 9A,
9A,
okay. Okay. I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the consent items not pulled.
Ms. Jackson?
yes,
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
I will start with item 7E, which is the contracts under 10,000 for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Mr. Connors moved.
Second.
Second by Dr. Harner.
So for the Mind's Eye Consulting and the Focus 5, is it possible to get detail for the training mileage that was claimed? And then the travel for the Mind's Eye, and then the travel expenses for Focus 5 Incorporated?
Somebody in purchasing, maybe?
We can try to answer it. It always helps to have the questions in advance, but.
No, you can email it to me, that's fine. You don't have
Okay.
to answer anything tonight.
In terms of the contract, and I haven't exactly looked at it, but if it's just, we're asking the board to approve a contract, we might not yet have any expenses associated with it. So unless this is a contract, we'll get back to you, but there might not be any expenses incurred yet, since it's just the formation of a contract and not the payment of an invoice.
Okay, it's the contracts, POs under 10,000, the dates are 3/11. So if you don't have it when you get it, I just want the detail for the mileage for both of those. One is mileage and then the one training expenses.
Most definitely.
Thank you.
Then we'll move on to 7F, which is travel. I'll take a motion and a second for that. I'm sorry, we have to vote on that one. Sorry, I have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of 7E. I jumped.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 no.
Now I'll take a motion and a second for the consent item 7F to travel.
So moved.
Mr. Connors moved.
Second.
Dr. Harner second. Any questions or discussion on travel? Mr. Rollins.
I guess this is where the trips to Spain show up, so can someone speak to that?
Cyrus, is she here?
I mean, the last detailed discussion I remember about this is they actually converted to like teleconferencing interviews.
Right, but my understanding, and
Okay.
Ms. Lumpkin, are you familiar with this contract?
Yes, I'll try and answer the questions on behalf of Colleen Cyrus.
So, Mr. Rollins, you.
So the question was raised by one of the speakers, why are we sending people to Spain?
The program, there was participation in the program last year. The program is utilized to fill hard-to-fill positions from SPED to bilingual. There are 3 individuals that we're recommending for that travel. The travel expenses are paid through a
That was going to be one of my questions, because I did remember that the government of Spain actually reimburses us for the
That's
costs
correct.
incurred in doing
Yes,
this.
that is
That's why we
correct.
signed off on it.
Although I still do remember that we used to, I mean, at some point, we were doing this by teleconference, I thought, so that apparently didn't work out.
My understanding is it wasn't as effective, and we saw a significant need in that area. And again, it's fully reimbursable.
Mrs. Powers?
The person one of the people we sent to Spain last year, though, is no longer with us. So my concern and why I'm not going to support this, whether it be grant funded or not, those are still taxpayer dollars, and I don't feel like we have done a good job of being selective with who we send over there. Last year's person is no longer with us.
Just to clarify, Ms. Lumpkin, I believe the funding source are not grant dollars, but they're funded by Spain, the government of Spain.
Government of Spain. I apologize. Thank you for the correction.
Any other questions? Now I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of 7F travel.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mrs. McCulloch, I didn't hear. Okay. Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers? This with 5 yeses and 2 nos.
The next are the bid recommendations. Ms. Jackson, did you want those together or separately? Together? Okay. I'll now take a motion and a second for the 3 items, 8A, B, and C, which are the bid recommendations.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Dr. Harner. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the bid recommendations 8A, B, and C.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 no.
Would you like to do 9A and B together or separately?
Separately.
Okay, I'll take a motion then for the approval of the 9A Ombudsman Program under recurring contracts.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion on the Ombudsman Program? Ms. Jackson?
Has the amount of the recurring contract remained the same, the dollar amount?
The contract is specifically specific to students.
It's 1.7 million, correct? So was that what so my question was, has it changed from last year, do we know? Because how many years have we had this contract?
I believe this is going to be the 3rd year of the contract.
This is the 3rd year.
I don't have last year's contract, but I can get that to you.
Okay, and so I'd like to know that. And then it also talks about, was there a presentation at Ed Committee? Because part of this talks about implementation and assessment, and so I'm assuming that we're looking at that data before we're approving this contract. So that's already went through Ed Committee then?
We didn't bring the contract through Ed Committee, but there is an annual update on alternative education to Ed Committee.
And that's already taken place?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Ms. Powers?
So on page 2, it does show where the cost per student has gone up over the last 3 years, from $37.71 to $38.84 to now $4,000. Or that's the projected. I guess I'm trying to understand why the cost is going to go up when we've demonstrated stability. We've been with you for 3 years. We're going to go out another 3 years.
This is the pricing we've been able to negotiate with the vendor. That's all I can say, really.
I think it's really poor. Who paid for this?
I don't know.
Again, unacceptable.
It was not an internal document. That's not an internally created document.
Well, it just points to, it's a 4-color glossy, very expensive brochure, and I don't need this. And if we can't contract a better rate, they don't need to be producing stuff like this. And in the time that Ombudsman was courting us for us to be able to do work with them, I got 4-color glossy stuff every single time they presented to us, and it was the same stuff. They're putting a lot of money into printed materials on our backs, and I don't think that's acceptable. We also originally contracted them, contrary to what it says in here about at-risk students, it was credit recovery. That was the primary objective, was credit recovery. And I don't see anything in here specific to credit recovery. So in the contract, it does talk about the reports and what to the last 3 years. I want everything broken down. Whatever they're giving us, I would like those exact same reports for the last 3 years. I will not support this. This is, when we demonstrate a commitment for 3 years and another commitment for 3 more years, and the cost is going to go up per student, that's not good negotiation.
Any other questions or comments? None, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on approval of 9A, the Ombudsman Program.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
No.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 2 nos.
I'll now take a motion and a second for the approval of item 9B, which is the Kids at Core recurring contract.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Rollins, second by Mr. Connor. Any questions or discussion on the Kids at Core? 9B, Mr. Rollins.
It's more of a, it's entirely a process question. So this is under recurring contracts. I just don't recognize this name. Have we actually had a contract with these people before? And it looks like it's like for a one-day training.
Yes.
Mrs. Brand, okay.
They've done administrative academies for us before, and so this is for May 15th and May 18th. They will do 2 Illinois Administrative Academies, 1603 and 1611, for quality assessment and design and rigorous growth goals and data analysis. So we've worked with them in the past. We worked with them through our PALS grant, as well as we work with them through our Fund 10 funding.
Okay. I guess at some point we ought to have a conversation of what a recurring contract is, because just the fact that we've worked with a particular vendor in the past before, I don't know that, to me, strikes me as a recurring contract. So at some point, we really ought to define this so we know what's under there.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Jackson?
Actually, Mr. Rollins stole my thunder because I was going to say the same thing. I don't know, because we've worked with them, that this makes it a recurring contract. So basically, we've used this dollar amount will exceed the $10,000 that the board, that doesn't need the board to say yes. So that's the reason that it's being brought to us tonight, correct?
That is correct, and we look at whether or not they're providing the substantially same services in order to determine whether or not it's a recurring contract. So has the board approved it in the past is the first question, and then is it the same or substantially the same type of services, so training services.
And when you say approved, what do you mean? Just because
so it's been one.
The coordinator then called the roll on the approval of the Kids at the Core recurring contract.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 no.
Okay, we'll move on to item 10B under other consent. I'll take a motion and a second for the financial results year-to-date.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Questions or discussion? Mr. Rollins.
Yeah, I just had a question. The executive summary, it says that under utilities fuel, we've spent $1.2 million more than last year at this time due to electricity costs. Is that, I don't know who's going to answer this. So did the rate rise? Has our usage risen? Who's going to answer this? I did send this ahead of time.
Okay.
The superintendent?
Okay.
I didn't get it.
Oops.
I'll check.
Okay.
I'll get back to you on that.
All right, I sent it over the weekend.
Okay.
So we don't know why our electricity costs are $1.2 million more than last year?
The biggest issue, what's going on right now, is we're changing from a cash basis accounting to accrual-based accounting, modified accrual. So essentially what's happening is as the bills come in, instead of looking at everything as if it was at your home, which would be, you pay the bill when you recognize the expense when it comes in. what we're doing is we're recognizing it right away when it comes in. So we've actually, the bills, even though the board hasn't approved those bills yet, we know that we see them, they're waiting to be paid. We're including those as expenses because those are expenses we have. So that's part of that process as we change from cash basis accounting to accrual basic, modified accrual accounting. So that's what we're seeing in a lot of that.
If somebody could just chase that down and let me know for sure. Thanks.
Ms. Jackson.
So I have a couple of questions, and they don't have to be answered now, but when I look at this, I'm looking at pupil transportation. We spent over $35,000 more this year, but I know now we're in a zone plan, we have less buses and different things like that, so I'm just wondering if that has any impact on this. The other one is for professional services. I like a definition of what that means, of what that is, and then I guess examples of professional services.
Please repeat the question.
For the pupil transportation, we've spent $35,000 more this year than the prior year. So I'd like to know why that is. And then for the professional services, it said expenditures are approximately $1.8 million, the definition of what professional services are, and then some examples of those.
Okay. Mrs. Benson or Ms. Talbert Scott, do either of you have an answer tonight, or should we?
I don't need an answer tonight. You can just send it to me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Now I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the financial results year-to-date through February 2015.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Herner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We will now move on to the closed session consent items, including the following items. Resolution authorizing dismissal of non-tenured administrators, resolution authorizing dismissal of probationary teachers, resolution authorizing dismissal of temporary and part-time teachers, resolution authorizing dismissal of a fourth-year probationary teacher unsatisfactory performance, resolution authorizing dismissal of non-tenured administrators, a resolution authorizing reclassification of certified district administrators to teacher status, and the HR organizational report and professional development report. And the following student closed session discipline items in which expelled or suspended students are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. The following students, AR-1, ELC 2 and 3, DJM4, TCD 24, are expelled for the remainder of this school year and the first semester of next year. Following students, DMR 19 and TLW 23, are expelled for the remainder of this year and the entire 2015-16 school year. The expulsion for the following students, GCH 20 and CAS 22, are held in abeyance contingent upon a conditional probationary agreement for the remainder of the 2014 school year and the first semester of next school year, being executed on or before the next board meeting. The expulsion for the for the remainder of the 2014-15 school year and the entire 2015-16 school year, being executed on or before the next board meeting. And the expulsion of the following students, CMF 7, is held in abeyance, contingent upon a conditional probationary agreement for the remainder of this school year and the first trimester of next year, being executed on or before the next board meeting. The following students have been granted a conditional probationary agreement: FXR-5, TLT-6, ATJ-8, TQH-9, JDP-10, DCM-11, MJB-13, CBF 14, NSM 15, JSF 16, COM 17, and TRW 21. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. Are there any items that board members would like to have pulled for separate consideration? Ms. Jackson?
11, B, C, E, F, G, H, 12.
And all of 12, okay. Ms. Powers?
I would just like separate consideration for 11, G and H. You can do them. Separate
those.
consideration for those two.
Okay, all right.
And then 13, B like boy and I, and you can do them together.
Okay. Thank you. I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the consent, closed session consent items not pulled.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, I'll now take a motion and a second to approve items 11B, C, D, E, and F.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. There's no questions or discussions, so I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of 11B, C, D, E, and F. Oh, D wasn't pulled?
You had me over here, so I'm like, I don't think I pulled D.
Oh, I thought you did,
Okay.
I'm sorry, okay.
No.
All right, so it's B, C, E, and F. All right. So, we have a second on that. Okay, there is no discussion then, so I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of items 11B, C, E, and F.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers? Ms. Jackson?
No.
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 no.
Okay, now I'll take a motion and a second for the approval of item 11G.
So moved.
By Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. The coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 11G.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
No.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 2 nos.
And I'll take a motion and a second for the approval of item 11H, which is the HR organizational report.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Coordinator call the roll.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 2 nos.
Okay, I think I'm on to the next page. I'll take a motion and a second for the approval of item 12, student discipline.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. The coordinator then call the roll on the approval of student discipline items listed under number 12.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 no.
And I'll take a motion and a second for the approval of items 13B and I.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Dr. Harner. Have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of items 13B and I.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mrs. Powers,
No.
Ms. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs.
Yes.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you very much. One real area of concern I want to start with is state legislature and the governor have very important work to do in the FY15 fiscal year, but unfortunately, there is an unresolved budget issue that passed the House today that basically reduces school funding and state funding for schools by just over $2 million in the Rockford Public Schools with a 2.5% across-the-board reduction. That's very challenging to receive that kind of news this late in the fiscal year, and we're monitoring that carefully. We're also concerned as we look at the FY16 budget, there's a lot of work to be done to provide the level of funding that is needed for increased state funding. Some positive news, again, I wanted to thank and congratulate all of our Golden Apple semifinalists, Amy, and then also our winners, Amy Orvis and Heidi Huey. It's really exciting to see the recognition. Mrs. Bachman invited me to her class for the Race to Feed, and we were able to work with some students at Barber today. That was a wonderful experience. Finally, as Mr. Connor pointed out, we want to congratulate our state champions at Auburn, and looking forward to visiting the Building Trades Expo this week to see some students that are going to learn about the district's continued partnership there. Thank you, Mr. Scrivano.
Okay, we'll move on to committee reports and start with Mrs. McCulloch for the Education Committee report.
Education Committee has not met since our previous board meeting. We do have a meeting scheduled for April 6th. That's Monday at 5:30 in this room, where we'll be discussing the new recommendations for the code of, or any changes for the code of conduct for next year.
Okay. Mr. Rollins, the Operations Committee report.
The Operations Committee also has not met. I do want to emphasize that we have changed our meeting date at the request of the administration for April. Normally, we meet on the first Tuesday of the month. We are instead going to meet on the third Tuesday of the month, April 21st at 5:30 here in this room. And we will be taking a look at the first public look at the draft budget for fiscal year 16.
Dr. Harner, the Facilities Plan Oversight Committee report.
The Facilities Plan Oversight Committee met last Tuesday, March 17th. We looked at a whole bunch of detailed reports with respect to the facilities bids, expense status, and progress. We can state that the progress is moving along pretty well, and financially things are in good shape as well. Without going into great detail, there are reports out on board. Reports continue to evolve ever so slightly, but I think they're in pretty good shape and give a very detailed both overview and project by project, building by building status of where things are. We spoke about communication plans for the schools. And I don't know exactly the timeline when things will be there, but we hope to have communication both at the website level, the building, and even sent out in other paper copies to indicate, particularly for those schools where we know precisely what the situation is and the timeline where that is, and as things progress, we can. This is still in the developmental phase, and and a communications person is going to be coming to the committee regularly now so that we can make sure that stuff gets out there, so we can communicate to parents timelines and what is actually happening in the buildings as things firm up, as the progress of each specific, as the progress of the plan moves forward. Sometime soon there will be, I don't know if that happened, if Mr. Schmidt did the have you received anything from the demographers yet? Not yet, so we're waiting on that. Oh, go ahead.
They requested some additional information from our IS department, and we presented that to them, or sent the file to them yesterday.
A process in order to look at the zones with respect to what the new, with the new footprint of the district elementary schools, and then we also spoke briefly about how that will affect or may affect both the secondary and high school zone situations. The last area that we touched on was to create a process with respect to those schools that are identified and what as closing, and there's still a little bit more work that needs to be done on this, but we committed to create a committee that will include 3 members of the actual Facilities Plan Oversight Committee, members of the district, school district, people from the city, the county, and the park district to talk through and then how to engage and to figure out a process to engage the community as, appropriately in order to plan effectively for those schools as they are taken offline. The next meeting is also scheduled for April 21st at 7 o'clock. So Todd, we maybe should consider rescheduling potentially, or Todd's going to be running back and forth between meetings, so. And Mike has got to be at 2 places at once, so he can Skype into one maybe.
At the facilities, I know you haven't met, but has anybody gotten any feedback about the parking situation over at Guilford the night of the regional final? Because it was deplorable. And I don't, from what I understand, the field house is done, the parking's done. What it is what it is, which is no sidewalks and an extreme safety hazard when something like that's going on.
We'll ask Guilford. Nothing was brought to my attention about that specific event.
Well, I got a lot of feedback.
Sidewalks where?
So it turns out that I clocked it because I had to walk 3/4 of a mile because it was, the entire parking lot was full. The parking lot over there was on the other side of the building. I don't know that it was full, but the street that you turn down off of Spring Shaw it is? Shaw was both sides, which it's only a 2-lane road, and both sides had cars all the way down to where it tees into another road, and they were also down a side street and down that road that it tees into, which is where I had a event like that, and to have that many people turn out and that we can hold them, but I'm walking alone in the dark 3/4 of a mile because I was staying and they asked me to talk to some folks that were there. So it's not safe. There's no lights, there's no sidewalks, and even when I was walking up, one car could barely get through because it's cars on either side. So if you build it, they will come, but they can't park.
To look at alternative parking.
Mr. Schmidt, what was the net difference on parking spots? Are we down significantly on parking?
I don't have that number off the top of my head.
We'll follow up on
We'll
what the net difference is to see if that's created by the construction. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Well, and if there needs to be directions about parking in the lot that is far from the field house, from what I could tell, it wasn't on the other side.
By the tennis center.
But there wasn't clear direction, and
There's
so.
not an easy way to get to it.
No, then you have to walk all the way around the building to get to the field house entrance, so.
Not sure who was next. Mr. Connor, were you next? Ms. Jackson?
So I had a question from your report, Mr. Harner. It sounds like this committee is creating another committee? So is there going to be another committee created out of this committee to look at something else?
We're creating group of this committee to study the closing process of schools.
And so that's going to be created out of this committee that's currently formed? There won't be new people?
3 members of this current committee will be on it, as well as people from initially. I mean, this is just to understand the process.
Okay, so it's a subcommittee, so it's not open, is what I'm saying. So people won't apply for this committee?
No.
Okay.
Yes. Ms. McCall?
Do you mind if I respond to that as well, Ms. Jackson? It came out of, in part, it came out of the first Facilities Task Force, where that committee recommended that there be a subcommittee or some sort of committee moving forward to look at the process of what we do with the buildings that are going to be closed. And instead of leaving that with Facilities Task Force, we just closed our committee down, and that subcommittee moved under the Dr. Harner's.
Mr. Connor?
And could I just say that part of the reason, there were people that were already recommended from the previous committee to be on that committee, and so that was, I think, part of where the membership or the group is that are moving on to there. Thanks for letting me reply.
Mr. Connor?
Yep. 2 points. One, in terms of the Illinois state statute. So I think in terms of this process, what I might say is part of that process will be recommended criteria because there are many limitations. So there's a lot of work to be done to structure our approach to the buildings, which, as a reminder for everyone, we set aside $500,000 per building to avoid issues with having buildings closed. And our intention is to make sure we engage with the public, let them know what our options are, and get guidance on what is allowable by state statutes and what we can do with cooperations potentially with other entities. So that's the first part on the subcommittee. The second is, in addition to the things that Dr. Harner described, we're also going to be coming up with a format for a report to the board. We have quarterly reports that we do owe the board, and things such as costs, schedule, et cetera, are going to be a part of that, and that's something we're in the middle of putting together. So I want to make sure that everybody has that expectation that we will also be producing that.
Okay. So we'll now move on to our action items for tonight. The first item for the HVAC replacement at Roosevelt Center and the window replacement for Marsh Elementary. Is there a motion and a second to approve these?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Dr. Harner. Is there any questions or discussion on the approval of item 16B? Not, the coordinator then call the roll.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 no.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the board policies that were presented. 2 of the policies are being pulled for a little final improvement, so items D and E are being pulled. So I'll take a motion and, well, let me first ask, are there any policies you wish to have separately approved? Ms. Jackson?
So you're asking for, well, no, so then we can have discussion, correct?
Okay, so I'll take a motion then to approve the board policies C and F through P.
So moved.
Moved by Mr.
Second.
Connor, second by Mr. Roth. Is there questions and discussions?
Two teachers? Correct.
That is the 5.220.
So whether, you want to know what terminology we're using?
Well, yeah, we changed them to guest teachers. I don't know for the policy if it needs to align with what they were calling them, or if we're back calling them substitute teachers. I'm not, sorry, not calling them the title of substitute teacher.
The title in the board policy actually reflects the title used by the legislature.
Any other questions? Okay. All right. We will have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the board policy C and F through P.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. Are there any other new business items or agenda recommendations for tonight? Seeing none, I will then ask for a motion